Hello, and welcome to this, our 69th live stream. They might be giants. Now, this is a pun. Our Monday video was about Goliath and the giants of Gath. But this is also a cultural reference to a very, I wouldn't say a well-known, but a influential alternative band called They Might Be Giants. And I have to admit, I am a fan of They Might Be Giants. And my favorite album of theirs is Apollo 18. And I have to admit, the song, the guitar, I love that song. I think that's an absolutely great song. It's based on The Lion Sleeps Tonight, but they completely changed the words. They do a lot of parody songs, and they're just a really talented, great band. So if you're into alternative music, do check them out. They are definitely worth it. So, with that said, let's get into tonight's live stream. We have got a ton of super chats tonight. You guys have broken the record for most super chats prior to going live. We're starting out tonight with 24 super chats. That's never happened. That's absolutely never happened. But thank you very much. We do appreciate every super chat. Previously, I have to explain. We do keep track of these things, and the previously held the most super chats we got prior to starting a live stream was 14. So I don't know where this influx of super chats is coming from, but it is phenomenal. I mean, it's just blowing our socks off. It's blowing our sock puppets off too. So I mean, so there's going to be some consequences to this, unfortunately, which is that we might have to be a little more selective about non-super chats tonight. Now, we still want to take non-super chats. This is a service. We're doing this as a ministry. We're really grateful for the financial support. We need this financial support. We're grateful for it, but we also want to give back too. And that was the whole purpose for us doing these live streams, was to answer people's questions, whether they gave us a super chat or not. So we might have to do a few less tonight. I'm sure next week the number of super chats will go down, and then we'll do more non-super chats then. But so if your non-super chat does not get answered tonight, please don't feel disappointed. If it comes down to it, we might have some other solutions that we're working on that say maybe address this more directly. So anyway, the rules are going to be the same as always. Super chats have priority. That's no surprise there. But if you are asking a question that's a non-super chat, we do ask that you begin your question with a Q and a colon. We also ask that you post the question only once. If you post it more than once, we just won't answer it. Or even probably acknowledge it, because that sort of spamming just confuses me as I scan through the live stream. Also, if you are asking about something in the Bible, like a Bible verse, we ask that you include the reference to the verse, so book of the Bible, chapter, and verse as well. Or if it's a foreign word, please give us what you think the word is and what language it's from, so I have a little bit of context to go from. Oh, and one other thing. If you use acronyms, please tell us what they mean. Was NDE near-death experience or non-denominational evangelicals? We have opinions on both, but we weren't sure which one it was. So anyway, let's start getting into the questions. And we are still going to start the night with some non-super chats. In fact, we're going to actually start the night off with a comment. Okay. Our first comment of the night is from Brick Creation. They could be giants socks. Giant sock puppets. Ooh. Ooh. Well, he is green. The jolly green giant sock puppet? Oh, that's almost too terrifying to think about. Yeah, that Mr. Empty Conjecture is making the rounds. We've noticed on a few of our, let's say, our YouTube peers that people are making references to Mr. Empty Conjecture on other people's channels. So, yeah, that guy gets around. I mean, you're just stoking the guy's ego. I mean, he's already a raving egomaniac. So, yep, they could be giants. Oh, so anyway, thanks for the comment. It made me laugh. Now for our first non-super chat question. Pennius Theologian asks, do you think Abraham used images in his worship? As far as I know, it would have been the normal practice. Sinai was later. Are there examples of worship without images in the ancient Near East outside of the Old Testament? I'll answer the last question first, which is, are there examples of worship with images, without images in the ancient Near East outside of the Old Testament? There is some sparse evidence of this in Egypt. Not a lot of evidence, but there is some. We do see, for example, some religious practices like thurification and libation offerings made in front of, say, empty shrines and empty thrones. So there is examples of this. We see there's actually one example that dates to the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, where there's a row of gods being basically on parade, and there's this one empty throne that follows them. So there is some examples of this. It's very odd, and it's not very common, but we do find some examples of this in Egypt. Okay. Now, get to your first question, which is, do I think that Abraham used images in his worship? And my answer to this would be yes. I do think he used images in his worship. We don't know exactly which images. We do know that, for example, I think it was Isaac. Isaac. Not Isaac. Jacob. Okay, Jacob. He and Rebecca steal Laban's idols. Well, why would you steal their idols? Well, they're fertility idols. Okay. So there is some, at least some evidence that the patriarchs, and by when we mean patriarchs, talk about patriarchs, we mean Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, at least used some images in their worship. We don't know how often, and we don't know how extensive. We do know that the Israelites would have set up images of ancestors. They did perform some ancestor worship as well, using images that possibly were called teraphim. And there is even some evidence that going into, say, the United Monarchy, that these practices still remained. So the answer is probably yes. Probably yes. So anyway, I hope that answers your questions. Thank you very much for those questions. Interesting questions. We don't much think about pre-Sinai religion amongst, say, the patriarchs, but it is a different practice. And if you want a really, really good book on this, I would recommend Richard Hess's, I think it's Ancient Israelite Religion. Richard Hess, Hess. Very good book on the subject. Excellent. Probably the best book on, say, the religion of the patriarchs. So, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, we do. My producer asked if we have this in the library. I said, yes, we do. We have an electronic copy of it. Okay. Our next non-super chat is from M. Scotty. And he asks, would you say the third heaven is... What would you say the third heaven is like ontologically speaking? I don't know if ontologically is the right word for this. Probably you mean metaphysically, but that's okay. You mentioned that space and time are purely conceptual in this realm as well. Yes, they are. They are conceptual in this realm, and they're probably conceptual in the third heaven as well. Now, when we mean third heaven, we mean basically what is the heaven like around, say, God, the angels, the heavenly host, the souls of the deceased. So that's what we're talking about here when we talk about the third heaven, the spiritual realm. Now, when we say that time and space are purely conceptual, that's not to say they aren't real. There does seem to be causality in heaven. So it's not like time stops or space has no meaning. It's just a different framework for space and time. There does seem to be causality, because one of the things we find, for example, in, say, the Book of Revelation, is the martyred saints, or the deceased saints, worshipping before the throne. Well, worship is an act that takes place over time, and ergo over space as well. Space of some kind. Maybe not physical space, maybe a kind of spiritual space, but space nonetheless. So there is a causality, cause and effect aspect to all of this, where you have a sequence of events, one following after the other. So while it may be conceptual, and while the rules may not be exactly the same as we find it here in, say, the physical universe, there does seem to be rules of time and, say, space of some sort in the third heaven. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. It is an interesting question, and one could wax eloquent about this, because there's actually a lot that could be at least speculated, postulated, derived from philosophy. There's a lot of places you can go on this topic. So you can't really get a lot more into this without, we'll say, more specifics. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I hope that helped. Okay, our third non-super chat tonight is from Chow Yi. This is a very interesting question for me, considering that I did some peer-reviewed research on vampire religions. And he asks, does Judas Iscariot and Cain play a central role in real contemporary vampire cult mythology like they do in much of vampire media? Any idea how the association begun? Okay. To some limited extent. Okay, now, we're going to qualify this. Now, Judas Iscariot does not play any central role in contemporary vampire cult mythology. He's not a figure. Cain's a little different. Cain is a little different. And the reason why Cain is different is some vampire cult groups do regard Cain, particularly the mark of Cain. After he kills Abel, Cain is given a mark to protect himself. from other children of Adam and Eve, killing them off. So some modern contemporary vampire religions do regard that mark of Cain as being the sign of being a vampire. Okay. Now, we do see this also in popular media too, like Vampire the Masquerade. Big, I mean, this plays prominently in that role. But we do find it also in vampire religion too. Particularly, what was it now? What was that group? No, it wasn't the New York group. It was the mail order group. Yes. My co-producer here, my producer here, is the co-author of that paper. Okay, so, but we're having problems right now remembering exactly which group that was. Let me do a quick look up here. I can probably find this one really fast. So I will look up my old paper here. Spirituality. This will be just a second. Temple of the Vampire. It was founded in 1989 out of Lacey, Washington. The leader is George Smith. Okay, so you'll find this references to Cain in some of Temple of the Vampires literature. Okay. So that's where you'd find that. Now, you wouldn't find this, you don't find this across the board in vampire religions, but only in some of them. Like, you won't find it in, like, some of the Gnostic vampire cults, like House Sajaza. You're not likely to find it in, say, more of, say, the Satanist bent ones, like the Temple of Set. But it does appear. It does appear. But it's not like what we find in the media. It's more of a explanation of where vampires came from. It was a kind of a explanation of ontology. Now, I'll tell you that a more popular figure amongst vampire groups is Lilith. Okay, Lilith. Now, for you who don't know who Lilith is, Lilith comes out of Jewish mythology. She's the other Eve. Okay? She's the Eve that does evil and is spurned before Eve. So Adam has two wives in this form of Jewish mythology, where you have Adam having both Eve and Lilith. And Lilith is seen as the mother of vampires. So Lilith is a lot more popular figure among vampire religions than is, say, Cain. But Cain does appear also. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting question. I very much enjoyed reading it. So, thank you very much, and I hope that that provided some insight. Okay, let's get to the super chat. Our first super chat is from Cosmologium for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is Seth in Genesis supposed to be Set, the Hyksos god? No. All right, that's a very simple no. They're not even spelled the same. They're part of the problem is in English, we spell the two very similar, but they're not really related etymologically. Seth, we don't even actually pronounce Seth correctly from the Hebrew. It's more like Shet. It's a sheen. And it's a kind of a hard T at the end. It's not a th. There's no theta there. It's not th. It's Shet. On the other hand, Set tends to be pronounced more with a hard sibilant S. So it's Set or Setek. This is where we get where Set is sometimes called Sutek. So it's one of those things where it's not really etymologically similar. It's also not it's not also mythologically similar. Set wasn't a Hyksos god. He was actually an Egyptian god, and he was an Egyptian storm god. Now, the Hyksos and the Egyptians are going to equate Set with Baal, who is also a storm god. But Set, as an Egyptian god, goes way back to the early dynastic period. He's one of the oldest gods in Egypt, and he's a god in Lower Egypt. So he's worshipped primarily in the Nile Delta. Seth, on the other hand, in Genesis, is the replacement child for Abel. He's supposed to be the good line. Now his line goes really bad. Okay? Even his line goes really bad. But he's the replacement for Abel. He's not a jealous, murdering Cain, as it were. So these are not related in any way. And only, how would I say? Only, what's it called? Those guys who mythologize, like for example, Jesus, like Myth Vision. No, they don't call themselves mythologizers. I can't remember the name of these modern people who equate, say, figures in the Bible to myths. Okay, but it's more along. That's where you see this stuff. You know, like the guys who compare Jesus to Horus. You know, mythicists. That's it. Mythicists. Thank you, Set Square Jack. Yeah, mythicists. You know, this is claptrap that comes from mythicists. And this is the only thing that you know. Now I'm getting everyone answering mythicists. Yes, we also have, by the way, a 20-second lag time between the stream and the live chat. So a lot of mythicists can be answered here. Okay. So yeah, you see this proposed by mythicists, but there's no real basis to it. Okay? Okay. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it. Our next super chat is also from Cosmologium for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there proof in Genesis that the snake is Satan? There's no proof in Genesis, but he's identified as the serpent in the garden in other passages. And let me see if I can find that. Yeah, Genesis does not identify Satan as the serpent in the garden, but we do find it elsewhere. I'll find that quickly here. Yeah, the primary identification comes out of, say, Revelation 12:9, which says, "And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil, and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels are thrown down with him." Okay. We also find this in, say, the passages, for example, in Ezekiel, I believe it is. Let's see if I can find that one too. Yeah, it's 20. While this does not directly relate to Satan as such, it does point that this is the enemy that was found in the Garden of Eden. Verse Ezekiel 28, verse 13. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, the topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and jasper, the lapis lazuli, the turquoise, and the emerald. And this is actually going to play out sometime else too. And the gold, the workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you on the day that you were created. They were prepared. You are the anointed cherub who covers. I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. Okay? So this is, again, hearkening back to that Garden of Eden. Now, the only, as I said, the primary identification here comes from Revelation. Okay, but that's I think sufficient to establish that Satan, at least that Satan. And there's more than one Satan, because Satan is actually a job title. It means the accuser. But that Satan of Revelation is the same Satan as the snake in the garden. Not necessarily the same Satan as in the book of Job, but the one in Revelation is the same as the snake in the garden. Okay? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay. Our next super chat comes from the MRB for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was Psalms always divided into 5 books, or is this a Masoretic thing? Ignoring how he wasn't related, why did Jesus give Mary to John, not James? Oh, wow. Those are two very different questions. Question stacking. I love it. Okay. The division of the Psalms into 5 books seems to be a Masoretic thing. Now, I did look this up. We do actually have a fair amount of material from the Dead Sea Scrolls. 11Q5 is probably the sometimes called the Great Psalm Scroll. So there was also a lot of those Psalm scrolls, and they're not all the same. It does seem that, especially in the first century, people would create psalters that would mix and match various psalms for, say, various purposes. So it doesn't seem like the psalms were always divided into 5 books. It does seem to be something that the Masoretes did, but it doesn't seem that the canon of the Psalms would remain consistent. Like, for example, we find 151st Psalm in the Septuagint. So there's actually more Psalms in the Septuagint than there is in the Masoretic text. So there does seem to be some variance here as to how the Psalms are arranged, what books, what sort of subdivisions they're organized by. Kind of like we're talking here what is called an issue of canonicity, where the order of the Psalms is being manipulated, or books of the Bible. You look at, say, for example, a Jewish Tanakh, which is the Old Testament. The very last books are Chronicles. Where in, say, Protestant and Roman Catholic canons, the very last book of the Old Testament is Malachi. So canonicity does play a role in how one reads the various books of the Bible, and the Psalms are no different. So you could rearrange the Psalms. The order in which the Psalms come in are not inspired. So people did move them around, and frequently did so for various reasons. So we do find that there's some differences here. Now, your second question, ignoring how he wasn't related, and I don't think John was related, honestly. Why did Jesus give Mary to John, not James? And that's actually a pretty straightforward answer, which is that James didn't believe yet. Christ did have to entrust Mary into someone who could take care of her and look after her while his brothers came to knowledge of the truth. And that took time. He couldn't trust his brothers. They just didn't believe. And they would probably hound or pester, and possibly even persecute Mary for her belief. So, he basically, handed Mary over to the disciple he most trusted. And it's that simple. He could trust John. John was full in on this. John did not abandon Christ at the cross. Peter was gone. He took off. Most of the disciples took off. John was still there at the cross. He was dedicated to the end. John proved himself someone who was trustworthy enough to take care of his mother. That's quite a trust. Yeah, that's quite a trust. So, I think here that definitely what we got is just a matter of actually not really expediency, but wise stewardship. Wise stewardship. Christ is entrusting his mother to the guy he can most trust. Yeah, the guy who passed the tests. Okay. As John wrote in his Gospels, this is written by the disciple who loved Jesus. So that is that's what's sort of going on here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And it's a couple of good questions here. Okay. Paternoster for 50 Swedish kroners. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Greetings, Dr. Falk. Do you think fringe alternative theories, such as those people like Graham Hancock, propose, help widen the scope of archaeology? About in the same way that cancer helps the body grow. Yeah. Um, Look, I don't think Graham Hancock um, has contributed anything useful to any biblical scholarship, any and this is the problem with a lot of fringe theories is they just confuse things. They add confusion. That's what they're adding. They're adding confusion. They're adding doubt. Um, they're anything they've contributed so far has been complete rubbish. Complete rubbish. And I won't just include, Graham Hancock here. I'll include David Roll, Ron Wyatt, all these charlatans. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Charlatans aren't trying to add to our understanding. They're trying to profiteer. They're trying to profiteer. And I've had enough personal run-ins with I've never met Graham Hancock. Okay, I'll say that. I've had enough personal run-ins with enough charlatans to understand that a lot of them are not just sincerely wrong. A lot of them know they're wrong, but they're pursuing it anyway. They double down on it anyway. So yeah, I don't think they help. They don't help the scope of archaeology one bit. They just add to the confusion of the laity, those who don't understand. Because a lot of them will think, a lot of people will read these guys and they'll go, hey, yeah, this makes sense, perfectly sense, totally logical, while ignoring all the other contrary evidence. Nobody is enlightened this way. This just adds to the darkness. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that answers your question. Okay. Our next one is from the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you too. If Sheol is not a place of punishment, why was the rich man suffering in Yeshua's parable in Luke 16:19-31? We'll talk about that, but let's get the passage up because it's always good to get the passage up. Okay, Luke 19-31. And I won't read the whole passage. Get to the suffering bit. And start at verse 23 here. And in Hades, he, this is the rich man, lifted up his eyes in being in torment and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides, all this, between us there is a great chasm fixed, in order that those who wish to come over here to you may not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. Okay, and that's probably all we need to say here. Okay. Now, notice the text carefully. It's not saying punishment, it's saying torment. Very, very different. It's not a place necessarily of punishment, it is a place of torment. you can be in torment while not being punished. The two concepts are not mutually exclusive. You can be it is actually conceivable that you are being punished, but you prefer the circumstances of being punished, therefore you're not in torment. Likewise, you might not be punished, but you're in a lot of torment. Okay? Like, for example, if you have a serious illness, you might be in torment. You know, if you're afflicted with serious migraines, or your body is falling apart from illness, you might be in extreme agony and torment, but you're not being punished for that. So, we kind of have to keep the categories of punishment and torment separate. The text here says torment. So, because the rich man here has chosen poorly, he doesn't want to be with God. He rebelled against God. He is in a place that's where there's torment. You know, he's having to experience the searing effects of holiness. And for those who are, let's say, lost, holiness can be a very, very traumatic and painful experience. You know, for the redeemed, holiness brings us pleasure and joy. For the unredeemed, it brings torment and pain. It's just the inevitable consequences of their particular choices. So, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a place of punishment, but it is definitely a place of torment, and you don't want to go there. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And we do have to keep in mind that not all torment and punishment are not exactly the same thing. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Our next super chat is from the Chem Leopard for $5. Does the use of AA in Proverbs 8:29 to 30 point to the Trinity? Is the wisdom in Proverbs Yeshua? If so, why is wisdom personified as feminine? Okay, you got 3 questions there. Let's take the first one, because I'm not exactly sure of that reference there, which is Proverbs 8:30. Here. Okay. When he set the sea its boundary, so the water should not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as a master workman. I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him. Let's see who the I is. I think that's wisdom, if I'm mistaken. Yes, it's wisdom. And we see that in verse 12. I, wisdom, dwell in prudence. Okay, this is not a does not point to the Trinity. I know that there have been some who have made this claim. It's a personification of wisdom itself. It's not a real being, wisdom. It's a personification. That's why it's personified as a woman. You know, it's personified as the ideal woman, but it is nonetheless personified as a woman. So, it's not Jesus Christ. It's not one of the persons of the Trinity. It's just a personification of wisdom. That's all this is. It's a literary device. It's a literary device. Okay? Yeah, I know. There's a lot of people who come to uh, the text thinking that everything's wooden literal, or people are speaking exactly like you'd find in an email. The Bible doesn't work that way. The Bible is also a piece of literature. It has metaphor. It has simile. It has alliteration. It has all sorts of literary devices. It's got chiasms, and it's got similes. It's got couplets. It's got structured poetry. I mean, it's just really, frankly, the more I study the scriptures, the more I am truly amazed at its literary accomplishments. It does stuff that you would expect of the highest, say, English literature. It really is that broad as far as its, say, literary devices. This is one of the things I really hate about the documentary hypothesis. Is it basically strips out the literary devices and says, "Oh, this is a marker of a new redactor," which is why I really hate the documentary hypothesis so much, is because it just destroys the virtuosity of the literature. So yeah, that's what's going on here. This is a literary device. It's a metaphor. It's a personification of wisdom, essentially. So and that's really all there is to this. This is not an allusion to the Trinity. It's not an allusion to Jesus Christ. It's just a poetic device. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope this helped. Our next one here is from the Camel Leopard again. $2. Thank you very much for super chat. Okay. Why are Yeshua and Satan both called Morningstar? Okay. We do. It is a good question. Yeah, this is a good question. Satan is called Morningstar, I believe, in Isaiah. Let's see what the exact is. Yeah, Isaiah 14:12. Now, in the other three passages, which we find Morning Star, say 2 Peter 1:19, I think that's a reference to Christ. Yeah, and so also is Revelation 2:28 and Revelation 22:16. Those remaining three are references to Christ. Now, what is the morning star? It's essentially seeing Venus on the horizon. And it's the sign of basically any basically bright heavenly body. Okay? The rising of Venus on the horizon is essentially, I mean, when you look in, if you do any sort of stargazing at all, you don't do this for very long before you notice that Venus is sort of the brightest star in the sky. It's not a star, it's a planet. Yeah, I know it's a planet. But when you're early, before, say, for example, the Enlightenment, ancient people didn't know the difference between stars and planets. Okay. So for them, this one particular astronomical body was the brightest of the stars. It was the brightest of the stars, and it made the biggest impression. And it would often arise when just before the dawn. Okay? So it was in many respects a harbinger. Okay? The morning star is the harbinger of the dawn. So you see the morning star, a new day is about to begin. Now, this is very, very potent symbolism. Very potent symbolism for the ancient mind. So what we see here, for example, as an allusion to Christ, is Christ appears as the beginning of a new day, a new age, a new millennium. Even if you don't take the new millennium literally, it's the Christ coming into the fullness of his kingdom. Everything's going to change. So that's why the symbolism is applied to Christ. Now, in the case of Isaiah 14:12, and I'll pull this one up because this one's a little more complicated. Okay? How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down from earth. You have been weakened. You have weakened the nations. Okay? So what this is more of along the lines of, this is what a position you held. This is what you could have been. Okay? You were like the star of the morning. You were the harbinger of light. You were the son of the dawn. Okay? And there's that allusion again to a star that precedes the dawn. And we know from Ezekiel 28 that he was one of the throned cherubim. He was right next to God himself. I mean, beside God. If you take, say, the two cherubim, that flanked God, that provided the holy space for God. 2 or 4, depending on which numbers you choose here, but he was one of the throned cherubim. He was one of the elect of the cherubim. He was the elite, absolute elite. I don't think it signifies a transfer of inheritance, but it does signify a transfer of role. Okay? It signals a transfer of role that Satan could have been a light to the nations. He could have been this. The potential was there for him. But instead, he uses that to deceive the nations. And that's why he's being cut down to earth. And that's why he's being replaced. And he's being replaced by God himself. So I mean, it's a very, very interesting juxtaposition here. That this is a role. Star of the morning is not just an astronomical body, it's a role. It's a role that's supposed to, announce the new age to come, or a new age to come. And a new dawn. And Satan misused that. He misused that. Now we anticipate the coming of Jesus Christ, who will be like a light on the dawn. It's often said he will return from the east. This is again an allusion to that sort of star of the morning symbolism. So, while Satan may have once had that sort of, symbol of being a Venus, he no longer holds that. It's now been passed on to somebody who is doing it for the glory of God himself. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. That is a really interesting question. It was a very, very interesting question. Okay, our next one is from Camelberg again for $5. Now, he asks, did Yeshua meet Peter before the miracle of the fish, John 1:35-42? 32. Let's look at John. John 1. $35. Okay, now these verse 28. These things took place in Bethany beyond the Jordan, where John was baptizing. The next day, I'm reading from verse 28 and going down to 30 context. The next day, he saw Jesus coming to him and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." Sorry. And this is he on behalf of whom I've said, after me comes the man who has higher rank than I, for he exists before him. Yeah, I know. Oh. I'm just trying to get the context here. Okay, let's start again, verse 30, pick up again at verse 33. And I did not recognize him, but he who sent me to baptize in water said to me, "He upon whom you see the Spirit descending and remaining upon him, this is the one who baptizes in the name of the Holy Spirit. And I have seen and have borne witness that this is the Son of God." And again, the next day, John was standing with his 2 disciples, and he looked upon Jesus as he walked, and he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." And the 2 disciples heard him, and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and beheld them following and said, "What do you seek?" And they said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" And he said to them, "Come and you will see." They came therefore and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. One of the 2 who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said, "We have found the Messiah," which means the Christ. 42. And he brought him to Jesus, and Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. Okay. I would have to do more research on this, honestly, to see exactly where the first meeting of Peter is, whether it is, if it integrates into this particular narrative. We do know that a lot of, say, the ordering of the Gospels is not sequential. Okay, and that's I think that is one of the things we have to keep in mind when we come to the Gospels, is that it's not always told in sequence. It's sometimes told in, say, didactic order, where it's meant to convey a certain event, a certain sort of narrative, by rearranging the order. And Jewish writers did this all the time. They did this all the time. This is nothing new. We see this going all the way back to, say, Joshua and Judges. They did this. The authors of Joshua and Judges mixed up the order to teach a lesson instead of trying to present the narrative in sequential, chronological order. So we do find this in the Gospels, and we have to be wary of that. So at this point, all I can say, without actually going into, say, more in-depth scholarly resources, is it's possible Jesus met Peter before the miracle of the fish, but it's also possible that this somehow dovetails with the miracle of the fish. So I can't say for sure because I haven't studied this close enough. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, our next super chat comes from the Camel Leopard again for $2. Oops. And he asks, thoughts on the rapture? Is it biblical? Well, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. How do I answer this without turning off half my audience? Okay. Yes, it is biblical. The question is not, is it biblical? The question is it correct? And it also depends on what one means exactly by the rapture. This is really where we're going to get into, where things are going to get a little sticky. Because the definition of the rapture is not the same for every believer. Now, so we have to sort of parse this. Now, the last question, is it biblical? Well, it's a teaching that comes out of, say, the biblical text. So, yeah, it's biblical. Is it correct? That's a whole different matter. Now, there is a view. I mean, we all know the Left Behind view on this, which is the rapture comes before the tribulation. It sweeps away the Christians, and they go to heaven without facing the tribulation. There's, in that view, a whole lot of assumptions. And assumptions I'm not exactly comfortable with. And the how do I say this? When you compare a lot of the rapture verses to the parables about the second coming, you do get the sense that this is not a rapture of the believer, but summary punishment of the unbeliever. Now, I said before, it also depends what you define the rapture as. If you define the rapture as that there was two people behind in the field, one was taken, one was left behind as the rapture. I think that event gets sticky if you say that that's the rapture of the believer. Now, whereas if you say, take the parable of the wheat and the tares, where the tares are removed by the angels, and then the wheat is taken off into the granary. The wheat, it's a whole different interpretation of the rapture. Because in that parable, it's the unbeliever that's taken first, and then the wheat's collected. If that's your definition of the rapture, which is sort of at the end of, say, the process, then that's less problematic. A lot less problematic. So, so as a lot of this is going to depend on your definitions. A lot of this is going to depend on what you define the rapture is. No matter what view you take on this, it's going to be probably a biblical-like view. Is it the correct view? Again, this is going to boil down to definitions and interpretation. So this is a matter of interpretation, and I will just leave it at that at this point. So, I will say that I myself do have a specific view on this. I do think say what's often called the rapture is summary punishment of the unbeliever. And I personally don't want to be part of that rapture. I think that would be a bad thing. Yeah, because what happens is the angels collect those people and they put them in the great wine press of the Lord and they go squish. Ugh. Yeah. Um. Yeah, the great wedding feast of the Lamb is kind of a gruesome event. I mean, it is. I mean, let's be very honest about this. This is where all the birds are invited to, and it's not just birds; it's vultures. The vultures are invited to come and eat. You didn't read that?
No. No, I didn't read that about the wedding.
Yeah. You're allowed to kill sacred cows, not invite vultures to the wedding feast. Oh, yeah. Yes, the unbelievers are the grapes in the great winepress of the Lord. Yeah, that's yeah. So yeah, you don't want to be part of that rapture. That's all I'm saying. Okay, that's just you just don't want to be part of that one. And that does seem to be the first one, not the second. So anyway, I will just leave it at that. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Okay, the next super chat is from the Camel Leopard again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Does the gift of salvation negate Abraham's bosom? Can people still go there when they die? Probably not. And that's you wouldn't want to go there anyway because it's empty. There's no reason to go to Abraham's bosom at this point, really. The whole purpose of Abraham's bosom was to counteract a certain problem in theology, which is how can unredeemed humans who are faithful in God go to heaven without having their sins forgiven? The dead couldn't go to heaven, essentially, and this is a long-standing problem of Israelite literature, because dead people are dead in their sins, and sin cannot be in the presence of God without retribution. So Abraham's bosom was there so that those who had faith in God had a place to be where, until Christ came, forgave the sins, and after that, people could go then directly to heaven. So that compartment in Hades or Sheol no longer has any use. It just doesn't. It doesn't need to. It's not of any use anymore. So, so in many respects, yeah, it makes the gift of salvation, the forgiveness of sins by Jesus Christ, does make Abraham's bosom obsolete. It doesn't need it. It's not. It doesn't have a function anymore. So people don't go there. People don't go there. Not any longer, anyway. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, Mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. All right. Why didn't Egypt have good food security? Isn't the main advantage of agriculture over hunter-gathering? What about nobles and pharaohs, other ancient Near Eastern cultures? Okay. Why didn't Egypt have good food security? Essentially, it was because of the river. What gave them the ability to produce food, which is the Nile River, also was highly variable in how much food that land could produce. Essentially, if Egypt was highly dependent upon the rains that occurred in Eastern Africa, sometimes they got a lot of rain. And this would mean a high flood year, and a high flood year meant very fertile soil, well watered ground, a bumper crop. Sometimes the Nile River had so little rain, Nile Basin had so little rain that the river actually dried up in places, and you could cross the Nile River on foot. In Egyptian literature, this is called the meeting of the banks, where the two banks of the Nile River actually sort of touch, and you could actually go across the Nile River on foot. This happened near the cataracts, so up near Aswan. There's just places in the Nile that were so shallow that if the river dried up, you could cross on foot. So in those years where the water was really, really low, people starved, essentially. Because the river didn't flood, the canals weren't replenishing the fields weren't being fertilized by the silt that was being laid down by the inundation. So when you had that stuff happen, it really had serious consequences. So we do have to keep in mind that all this agriculture was highly dependent upon variations in weather. Now, what about nobles and pharaohs? Nobles weren't at an advantage here. We do find evidence of chronic malnutrition in the nobility as well. So we do have to keep in mind that just because you were a noble didn't give you special privileges at the food line. This is also true of, say, kings. This is one of the interesting things we actually find out about the kings of Egypt. Is princes didn't get special treatment. Not at least as far as food allotment. Now, once you were king, that was different. But being a son of a king didn't give you special privileges for food rations. Well, yes. My producer points out this is why gluttony is such a sin, because you're eating somebody else's allotment of food and they starve and they die. Okay? So the other thing is, because, say, your typical Egyptian prince didn't have access to large amounts of food, obesity was really rare amongst the nobility of Egypt. In fact, we only know of one pharaoh who was obese, which is pretty amazing. Given that you had 3,000 years of kings, you would have expect that, obesity would have been rife amongst the kings of Egypt, and it wasn't. We got the bodies. We got the bodies. And most of the kings of Egypt were fairly thin. They were very trim. The only exception to this seems to be Queen Hatshepsut. She was the only one who was obese, which is quite amazing. We don't. I don't know if she did the milk and honey diet or the milk and it wasn't honey. It was curds of some kind. Yeah, but yeah, we don't know exactly how she ended up obese, but she was. Uh, so she's the only one that we know of that was obese. As far as other ancient Near Eastern cultures, the there was much more food stability, for example, in Mesopotamia, but that's also because the rains were more consistent um, in the Mesopotamian region than they were, say, in Eastern Africa. So people could ration food a lot better and a lot more consistently in Mesopotamia than they could, say, for example, in the Nile Valley. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. But we also need to know too that once people's diets are set by most people's diets are set by usually age 21. If you've eaten in a certain way up to age 21, chances are you're going to follow that same eating pattern the rest of your life. So the Egyptians, princes, and nobles, because they had like fairly rationed and regimented diets all the way up to, say, their adult lives, continue to eat that way going forward. So you don't expect huge changes in diet after that fact. So, um, but this has been shown in the mummies. We just don't see a lot of fat mummies. It's just really interesting. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat is from Mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for super chat. Last week you correctly understood the story of Ham. Now recall Canaan and read Genesis 12, 14 to 15, 20 to 20 verse 2, 26, 9 to 8, 2 Samuel 11, 4, 5, 12, 14. Notice a pattern. Ah! That's a lot of verses. You could have just told me what you thought the pattern was. Wow, we're not going to go through all those verses. just telling you. We'll take a few here. Let's just take a few. And you could have saved me a little bit of work here. It's easier than you think. Okay. Well, let's just say 20 Genesis 12 verses 14, 15. And it came about when Abram came into Egypt. The Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful, and Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Okay. 20. Okay, forget 2 Samuel. All right. 20 verse 2. And Abraham said of Sarah's wife, she is my sister. So Abimelech and Gerar sent and took Sarah. Still not seeing the pattern here. There might be a pattern. I might just be thick. I did have a long day at work today. Genesis 26, 9 through 10. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, certainly she is your wife. How then did you say she is my sister? And Isaac said to him, because I said, lest I die on account of her. And Abimelech said, what is this that you have done to us? One of the people might have easily lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. Now, okay, that one is definitely reminiscent of Ham and Canaan. Yeah, that one, I will admit, that one right there is exposing the nakedness of Abraham there. So Yeah, adultery does do that. Adultery exposes the nakedness of the man. So there is a definitely a weak pattern there. 26 second. You said to ignore Samuel. Okay. So I think that's what you're trying to get at here, but I'm not really sure that's what they're driving at here. But uh mouthwash. He says guy seeks a woman in a certain way, does certain things. Mm, eh. Yeah, but I think that even happened before the flood. Oh, now I can do Samuel. Okay. All right. Second Samuel 11 5. And David sent messengers and took her. This is probably Bathsheba. And she came to him. He lay with her, and when she had purified herself of her pleas, she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent to David and said, I am pregnant. Okay, I'm going to make this one the last one, because obviously I'm not really getting it. 12, 14. However, because of this deed, you have given occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. The child that is born to you shall surely die. All right. Yeah, okay. If there's a pattern here, I'm not understanding it. Okay. So put it in the live chat. Just chalk it up to the fact that I spent a very long day lifting furniture, and I'm just not catching your drift here. So I'll thank you for the super chat. I try to notice a pattern. Obviously, I'm just not getting it. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, mouthwash for $2. Thank you again for the super chat. I heard that the 12 gems of Revelations are an ancient Near Eastern motif. Well, it is. Now, the problem is, yes, there are 12 gems, and mentioned in the book of Revelation. And it's really sort of to remind you of, say, the 12 gems of the breastplate. Now, in the case of Revelation, the 12 gems represent the 12 tribes. And the 12 stones on the breastplate of the high priest are also supposed to represent the 12 tribes. Each gem on the breastplate of the high priest was carved with the name of each of the tribes. Okay? So it is representative of the 12 tribes. Now, the exact nature of those stones, the identification of those stones differs from, say, Exodus versus, say, Revelation. They're different stones. Okay? The actual composition of those, exact identification of each stone, doesn't really matter here. Okay? What matters here is the number 12, and that it represents the 12 tribes of Israel. So when you see, for example, say the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem, and around it is being built, the foundation stones, each one of us is a stone that's being built, that's building up this kingdom. And the 12 stones, the 12 gems, are the 12 tribes. So that's where this symbolism comes from. It's really a tribal symbolism that's being represented here. Each one by a gemstone. And I might do a video someday on the gemstones of, say, the breastplate. That'd be I'd love to do this. Being a former jeweler myself, I had a fantasy of once of recreating a smaller version of, say, the high priest breastplate. but never did complete that project. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. It's an interesting question. I know James Hoffmeyer recently wrote a paper on the stones of the breastplate. There's also been several other authors who've done good work on this too. So I think it's one of those things that really is it's interesting. It's interesting just to see it, just because it does differ. It does differ dramatically. Okay. Our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. Oh, hello, Brick Creation. Some people use Proverbs 3:5-6 out of context to say you have to read the Bible literally, take their view, but what does it really mean? All right, let's pull it up and find out. Okay, Proverbs. 3, 6. Okay. Trust in the Lord. Excuse me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. Okay. A little bit back. Verse 1, my son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years and peace they will add to you. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Then it goes into the trust in the Lord with all your heart. Yes. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And do not lean on your own understanding. Okay. Now, this is not saying you can't use your understanding. It's saying you can't rely on it totally. Don't lean on it. It's basically the image of this is you're a walking stick. You're going along with a walking stick, and you're leaning on the walking stick to support you. So it's saying that your own understanding might not always be correct. In some ways, this is saying the opposite of how they're abusing it. Because to read a text literally, and I really hate that. I hate that word, the way this is used, because no text is completely literal, can be read completely literally. The Bible is a mix of many things. You know, when Jesus says, I am the door, he's not saying he's wooden hinges. You'd never read that literally. You know, when it talks about a husband will take his wife and they shall become one flesh, you're not literally being sewn to your wife. You know, it's just crazy that people still insist, oh, you have to read the whole Bible literally. Nobody reads the whole Bible literally. No one reads anything literally. Yeah. You know, Psalm 91:4, where God says, under my wings will I protect you, under my feathers will I trust. Well, he's not a chicken god. He's not a god of the he's not a chicken. It gets into almost sort of silliness. So, It's just you have to you have to understand that when you try to understand the Bible as only something read wooden literally, that they are doing exactly what the proverb here is saying, talking against, which is do not lean on your own understanding. Okay? It's not saying don't consult the understanding of others. It's saying that if all you do is rely on your understanding, you could be wrong. God doesn't only just, tell us wisdom through the scripture. He guides us to good teachers too. That's part of God's inspiration. That's the Holy Spirit guiding us into truth. The Holy Spirit, he can teach us directly, but more often than not, he leads us to people whom he has guided previously. So, to seek the truth in righteousness is according in accordance to verse 6, acknowledging him, trying to discover what God means. And if you discover what God means, God will make your path straight. So this is not a warning against basically learning. It's not a warning against learning. It's not a warning to take the Bible literally. It's a warning to not depend solely on yourself for wisdom. This is not nuda scriptura. It's telling you the exact opposite of nuda scriptura. Exact opposite of this. Nuda scriptura, it means you read the Bible and you don't consult anything else. You don't consult other teachers. You don't consult church fathers. You don't consult commentaries or scholarly works. You just, your sole source of input is the Bible. This is telling you the absolute opposite of this. The absolute opposite. That you cannot rely just on yourself. So, anyway, that's, I think, my take on this is that you trust God and that God will lead you into good teaching if you seek it. But you can't rely on your wisdom alone. And you acknowledge God as he guides you, and he'll make your path straight. That's what this means. It's pretty straightforward. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. I hope that helped. Okay. Next super chat is from Mouthwash for $2. Thank you very much, super chat. Is feet washing a euphemism for sex in Genesis 19:2? My first indication on this is no. Let's look at the passage anyway. Genesis. Well, there's going to be a caveat to this. So now this is we'll go to verse 1. Now, two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and starting at verse 1 here. As Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom, when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, bowed to them with his face to the ground, and he said, Now, behold, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house, spend the night, and wash your feet, and then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, however, no, but we shall spend the night in the square. Okay. This is not a euphemism for sex. This is a euphemism for hospitality. Okay? Washing feet was very, very typical of Middle Eastern hospitality. We find, for example, Christ washing his disciples' feet. So, in no way is this a sign of sex or an advance leading to sex. Now, here's a caveat. If you are a woman and you kept your ankles covered, an advance, basically, if you raise the hem of your garment up your leg, that was a gesture of an advance leading to sex. Okay. And we do have a lot of evidence for that in the ancient and actually modern Middle East. This isn't even something that's necessarily ancient. It's still is done today. But just washing the feet is just washing your feet. It's a sign. It's basically, this is a sign of hospitality. You come into a person's home, and the head of the home washes your feet as a sign of hospitality. Okay, because people wore sandals. People wore sandals. Your feet would get dusty and dirty. So it just feels nice to have your feet washed. Okay, it's just a sign of hospitality. That's all it is. Okay? Just don't lift the hem above the ankles. Okay, keep those hems down. Okay. There's actually a Coptic saint in Egypt who basically poked out both his eyes because he was a cobbler, and he was making shoes potentially for a woman, and she started raising the hem of her dress. He took sewing needles and poked out both his eyes right there. So yeah, that was a serious deal. Okay, so yeah, keep those ankles covered, ladies. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next one is also from Brick Creation. Thank you very much for $20. Very generous super chat. Thank you. Josephus, Tacitus, and Cassius mention signs during 60 to 70 AD. A fire sword in the sky, 2 suns, light on the temple altar at night, making it look day for a half hour. Do other historians do this for embellishment or something? That one is hard to say. I haven't looked at the sources on this. I have been able to figure out some of these signs. Like, for example, the chariots in the sky does seem to be a locust swarm. But as far as, say, fire sword in the sky, 2 suns, light on the temple altar, I don't know much about these particular events in the writing of these historians. So it's hard for me to say much more without actually reading them further. For example, when I read like Josephus, I mean, I don't even typically read most of his histories. I usually am more into his Contra Appian, just because that's more related to the sort of work I do. That's where Josephus preserves Manetho. So it's something I should look more into. I should read more of these ancient historians. I just haven't had the time. So that's all probably I could say at the moment. I don't have anything more to say on this. But it's possible that these could have been real manifestations. It's also possible that they could have been literary embellishments too. But I tend to lead to be that they're more observational. That's usually how I tend to lean, especially if they're something said within recent history of the author. So it's hard for me to say for sure, and I probably have to read it myself to form an opinion. But that's really all I can say for now. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I am having to engage these authors more and more. Sometimes kicking and screaming. I don't particularly like Josephus as a source. Yeah, he's fine for the life of Christ and for, say, recent events around the Roman Empire. But I've had to engage him more, for example, like on stuff concerning the Exodus, and it's on that stuff I find him very unreliable. So I've developed some very negative opinions towards Josephus at times. So I should, as I said, I should look into this more. I just haven't yet. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Well, anyway, too, I should also add this too. I wish I had the time to do more reading. If that's the one thing that sort of bums me out about having a say full-time job on top of doing YouTube is I don't have as much time to read these things as I would. Left to my brothers, I would read a lot. I'm a very, very avid reader. I love reading. Nothing I would rather do than take a day off with a good book. That for me is bliss. That for me is absolute bliss, is reading a book. So for me, tearing apart Josephus or Tacitus or Cassius, take a weekend off and do that. But time is usually not on my side on these things. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for super chat. Could the tomb of Abraham, the cave of the patriarchs, or the tomb of Aaron be used as evidence for Abraham or Aaron? Aaron, probably not. That's because the tomb of Aaron is highly dubious. It's highly dubious. It's highly suspect. We can't even be sure that it's Aaron's tomb. Now, we also can't be sure if it's Abraham's tomb, and this is the cave at Machpelah. What we have here is a long-standing tradition that it's Abraham's tomb. However, with that said, the cave at Machpelah has undergone some archaeological excavations. And they have found early bronze, middle bronze pottery there. Remains of Canaanite occupation. That's, as I said, dates to the early bronze and middle bronze periods. And this would definitely be consistent with the time of Abraham. So, is it evidence for Abraham? I would say it's very, very weak circumstantial evidence. It is a cave. It is very close to where it should be. And there's a tradition there. How good that tradition is, I don't know. But the archaeology of the site is suggestive that it is possibly the tomb of Abraham. Is it probably the tomb of Abraham? Well, that's a judgment call. And I don't have a particular opinion on that. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. We have to understand that every historical belief, every historical fact is, or statement, is a probability proposition. So we have to say, well, is it more likely than not? I don't know if this quite... in the case of the tomb of Aaron, I don't think there's enough evidence there. In the case of the tomb of Abraham, I don't know if there's enough evidence to say to put it over 50% probability. That's more likely than not. But there's also some evidence that moves that needle a little closer to the 50% line. So the evidence for, say, the tomb of Abraham is stronger than for the tomb of Aaron. But I'm not sure it's strong enough to completely say it's more likely than not. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. I hope that helped. Okay, next one is from Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Wow. If kosher isn't needed anymore, how do we get around Isaiah 66:15-17 saying people being consumed for eating mouse swine when God comes back? All right. Let's pull up here. Isaiah. $66. All right, and we're gonna take a couple verses here from the beginning of chapter 66, just to get a little context in. Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. Where then is a house you can build for me? Where is a place where I may rest? Okay. And so this is the Lord speaking. Go down a little bit, actually. Start at verse 12. For thus says the Lord, behold, I extend peace to her like a river, and glory to the nations like an overflowing stream. And you shall be nursed, and you shall be carried on the hip and fondled on the knees. As one whom his mother comforts, so will I comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Jerusalem. Then you shall see this, and your heart shall be glad, and your bones shall flourish like new grass. And the hand of the Lord shall be made known to his servants, but he shall be indignant towards his enemies. For behold, the Lord will come in fire, and his chariots like the whirlwind, and to render his anger with fury, his rebuke with flames of fire. For the Lord will execute judgment by fire and by his sword on all flesh, and those slain by the Lord will be many. Verse 17. Those who sanctify and purify themselves go to the gardens, follow one in the center, who eat swine's flesh, detestable things, and mice, shall come to an end altogether, declared the Lord. Okay. Now, I think what we're seeing here is not necessarily a doubling down the kosher law per se to the end times. What we're seeing here is the kosher law being used as a symbol of other things. Because frankly, most people are not going to eat mice. I mean, when it comes right down to it, okay, eating pig, yeah, people will eat pig. They're not going to eat mice. And I think because they're using this, the writer is using, the prophet Isaiah is using a mouse as a sign of a detestable thing. This is something people are really unlikely to eat. Okay? But he's juxtaposing this. He's using, say, swine's flesh. Okay, every Jew knows. Every Jew knows that pig is detestable. We have to remember this is prior to the fall of Jerusalem. So this is before the first Babylonian exile. So it's basically comparing, it's sandwiching swine's flesh, detestable things, and mice. The point is you're supposed to meet all three items in the center. Okay? It's a kind of structuring of the language. Yeah, pig. We all know pigs. You know, pig's supposed to be bad. Don't eat twig, pig. Every Jew knows this. Okay? Detestable things. Yeah, sure, okay. You just talked about pig. Yeah. Mice. Wait a minute. Who's gonna eat mice? You know? I mean, yeah, okay, you get the old Roman joke that they're so decadent that they're eating mice, but people didn't really eat mice. Except under very, very dire circumstances. It's not something people usually did by choice. It's meant to say, using this is meant to say that there's some detestable things here that go beyond diet. So this isn't actually talking about diet. It is talking about detestable practices. Okay? So we have to be kind of careful here not to read this over literally. And it is prophetic literature. This is definitely apocalyptic prophetic literature. So when you get apocalyptic literature like this, a lot of this stuff is symbolism of other things. Like, for example, detestable things, like worshipping idols. Murder, theft, adultery. These are sort of the big baddies, as it were. These are the big detestable things. Serving other gods. What we see here is the kosher law being used as a symbol, and almost a caricature. It's almost a caricature. It's not meant to be taken literally, because nobody would eat mice literally. At least not by choice. So, because it is meant to be a caricature, it's meant to say you're supposed to stop at that point and, okay, eat swine flesh? Sure, okay, I get that. I'm a Jew, yeah. Using that as a figure, as an example. If I were a Jew, I would say, oh yeah, sure, pig flesh, yeah, don't touch bacon. Yeah, everyone understands that. Detestable things, yeah, sure, I get that. Okay, I understand. I'm following. Mice. What? It's supposed to stop you in the text. It's an absurdity added into the text to get you to stop reading, to think about it. Again, this is one of those literary devices. One of these famous literary devices that I keep talking about, as in these live streams, is that it's meant to make you stop and consider what's going on here. So when you read that and it equates mice to swine's flesh, the pig, maybe it's not talking about diet. Maybe there's another meaning here. Camera lover goes, I don't know, mouse is kind of tasty. only my subscribers would say that. Cats like them. I mean, maybe there's something to it. Maybe we're missing out. I don't know. It's not for me. I'm sorry. I am not that into it. Nope. I draw the line. I'm an adventurous eater, but I draw the line at mice. I'll eat insects. I will not eat mice. That's a line too far for me. Oh boy. Oh, we're gonna get into another food food schism here. The mice eaters versus the mice abstainers. Yeah. So essentially, what this is doing is essentially it's an absurdity here to make you stop and think, and basically stop and think that maybe this has nothing to do with food or kosher laws, but a higher principle. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Our next one here is from Recreation for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you know other scholars who think the Pentateuch should be dated early and in Egypt based upon loanwords' cultural similarities? Well, you got, of course, Benjamin Noonan. You know, he's basically did much of the great research on this. Joshua Berman, I'd also say, it falls into that camp. See, who else would be? Yeah, there are several others. Alan Millard would be in that camp. Kenneth Kitchen, of course. James Hoffmeyer. Those are other scholars who are also in that camp. So, you know, it's not just one-off scholars. There's several that do. I think also Chris McKinney's in that camp as well. So there are scholars who definitely think that the Pentateuch should be dated early and has a strong Egyptian influence. So anyway, let's see. And then the next question is, why do mainstream date it late? And when it has these details, do they ignore them? They explain them away. Most mainstream scholars still use, at least in North America, still are highly influenced by the documentary hypothesis. And frankly, once you get trained a certain way, it's very, very difficult to break away from it. It creates if you break away from it, it does create a cognitive dissonance, as it were. So, in general, they either don't engage those details, they ignore those details, or they explain them away. And when they explain them away, they generally don't explain them very well. It's a very, very low bar of threshold that they need to explain it away as such. So, again, a lot of this comes out of basically the study of biblical studies. Basically, the history of biblical studies in the 19th and 20th century really is what this comes out of. Now we're seeing that pendulum swing. You know, we're seeing a lot more, let's just say, maximalist scholars coming on the scene. But it's still mostly a minimalist world. But there is, at this point, at least a controversy. At least we have a good debate going on. So I'm very, very thankful for that. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I hope that answered the question. Ah. Australopithecus afarensis broke the cardinal rule. Oh, well. Sorry, no, he didn't. Take that back. My software. Okay, Cataract 3 for $5. Thoughts on Deuteronomy 23:2. I think the chapter itself is more about cleanliness than moral standards, but I can see where it would seem unfair. 23. All right, and it says, let's start verse 1. Ooh. Yeah, 23 verse 1. No one who is emasculated or has his male organ cut off shall enter into the assembly of the Lord. No one of illegitimate birth shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of his descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall enter into the Lord. No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord. Okay. The assembly of the Lord. Let's talk about that. These are the people who are essentially permitted into the temple precincts. Okay. You have to be ritually clean to enter into the temple. This is what this is about. It's not about moral standards. This is not about morality. Okay. A person of illegitimate birth is not morally responsible for their illegitimate status. So this is definitely not about morality, but it is about ritual purity, ritual cleanness. And here we're using cleanness in the sense of normalcy. What is normal for the assembly that's permitted into the temple, or the tabernacle, as it were. So, if you wanted to commune with God inside the sacred space of the temple, there were criteria. And that criteria does include that your body is generally intact. Like, you can't lose a limb, or a sexual organ, or be of illegitimate birth, or not be an Israelite. Okay? Non-Israelites were generally not permitted within the temple precinct, or the tabernacle precinct. So these are really, really important considerations for sacred space. You have to meet the standards of the sacred space to be allowed into the sacred space. So that's what's meant here by the assembly of the Lord. These are the people that are permitted to go into the court of the temple. People who are ritually unclean were not permitted in. Those who are disqualified by defect aren't allowed in. Those who are disqualified because of illegitimacy or because they're not Israelites are not permitted in. So that's what's going on here. This is definitely speaking about what is normal. What is normal is allowed in. What is outside of what is normal for the nation of Israel, for whom the covenant is with. We have to remember that the Sinai covenant is with the nation of Israel. Okay? It's not with all of mankind. It's with Israel. And because it is with Israel, its temple, the temple of Yahweh, and the tabernacle only extends to, say, the nation of Israel. Now, in later times, when the Herod's temple is built, when the second temple is built, Herod the Great will expand the court to include a court of Gentiles also. And those other people who are outside of the assembly gather there. But that's not going to happen until the reign of Herod the Great, when we get a temple of, say, the Gentiles. And the Gentiles at that point, as well as these of illegitimate birth and those who have physical defect, they can go into that court. But they're not in the three, say, holy courts. So again, this is not about morality. It's about ritual purity and ritual cleanness, and what is considered to be normal for the sake of the nation of Israel and its covenant. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, I think we are going to switch over to Twidget now, because I overlap finally. Off. Okay. Right. And our next super chat is from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Well, good evening to you. Douglas Petrovich on Answers in Genesis identified Babel to be Eridu, Iraq. What are your thoughts? Besides that, Doug is a embarrassment. Ooh. Here's the problem with the Eridu hypothesis. And he's a big supporter of the Eridu expansion, and the idea is he thinks the Tower of Babel occurred during, I think it's the Uruk. I think he identifies it as the Uruk period, and when that Tower of Babel is destroyed, the people are spread out. The problem is the evidence for this is exceptionally thin. There's no evidence for this. I think he would have to produce some very, very extraordinary evidence. Part of the problem is the evidence from this period is very fragmentary. It's very, very fragmentary. You get anywhere, say, like, for example, Uruk period 3 or earlier, the inscriptional material we have is exceptionally fragmentary, not well preserved. We don't have long texts. It's going to be a really uphill battle for him to prove such a controversial hypothesis. But he's also, how do I say this? He tends to overstate his claims and assert them. One of the things I've always found with his books is he thinks he's proving something when he's really just asserting it over and over and over again. It's almost like he doesn't understand what proof is. And it's very strange because, like, you read his World's Oldest Alphabet and you see that he doesn't actually prove any of his claims linguistically. He just asserts them. Well, assertions aren't proof. They're just assertions. So I think he'd have to do a lot of work. And I don't think this is exactly in his field of specialization. I know he's done he has some education in, say, the religions of Mesopotamia, but he doesn't know Akkadian. He never took Akkadian. He can't read the language. He can't read Sumerian. How is he going to justify these claims? Without knowing the languages. I don't get it. So I think there's a lot of I don't think he's got the tool set to actually prove this adequately. So there's my thoughts. Uh, not much more I can say about that. I think he's over his head again. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, another one here from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, can the JEDP theory, hypothesis, be applied to the Septuagint or other ancient Near Eastern literatures? Have any other scholars tried to do this? Yes, they have tried this. With mixed results. And we'll say this. You could apply the documentary hypothesis to the Septuagint. Here's the problem with it, though. Is when you apply it to the Septuagint, you get very, very different results than when you apply it to the Masoretic text or when you apply it to the Samaritan Pentateuch. You use the same principles in both across those boards, you get very different results every time. At least in many cases. So, but you know, some things like, say, if you're basing, say, authorship changes on, say, what's it called now? Doublets, which is a very popular method. You'll probably get the same results for the Septuagint as you would for the Masoretic text. If you use it based upon, say, changes in person, you'll get different results. So it's going to depend on what methodology you're using when you do your documentary hypothesis here. So again, it's going to be mixed results. But I know there's been some scholars who have tried to apply this to the Septuagint as well. So yes, others have tried this. Again, results are mixed. That doesn't necessarily invalidate the documentary hypothesis, but it does raise certain questions over it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Linguist Ammo for $5. Oh, good to see you here, friend. And I did see your video today. Oh, that video was so painful to make. Oh, I bet. I would encourage everyone to go to Linguist Ammo's YouTube channel and check out his recent reaction video to Tony Costa interviewing Douglas Petrovich. It's very interesting. A very, very good reaction video. And he says, definitely lowered my head in disappointment more than once. Oh, yeah. I could see that. Oh, no, I won't say that yet. Okay, but yeah, that was a very interesting watch. I'll say that. That was a very, very interesting watch. And I did like your approach to actually critiquing Petrovich. I think that more of that needs to be said. I think some of your criticisms were definitely spot on. You know, such as is confusing of categories. Some of the crazy stuff. There's just some really, really crazy stuff that he says. And what surprises me about Petrovich is he's still doubling down on his theory that Manasseh and Ephraim invented the alphabet. I think at this point this is not a defendable hypothesis anymore. Especially given the discoveries at El Mara. You know, it's just not a viable hypothesis. So yeah, we know at this point that alphabetic scripts now date to at least the early Bronze Age, around 2350 BC. And so this is long before the time of Joseph. So, but Doug's going to double down on it. It's all he's got. So anyway, uh, very much enjoyed watching your video, and again, I'd encourage other viewers to go and watch that video also, because it was very, very good. Okay. Next one is from Billy Ningen, again, for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Sorry, I should have put accused before my questions. Actually, you don't need to do that on super chats. And the reason why you don't need to do that on super chats is because we always take super chats, regardless of whether I have a Q or colon in front of it. So it's not necessary for a super chat. It's only for non-super chats that we insist on this. Okay? And he asks, what is your opinion on scholarly rejection of Hyksos being ancestors of the early Israelites? Thank you. Okay. My opinion is that there is some confusion between the Hyksos and the early Israelites. Now, in some ways, when we talk about early Israelites, this is an anachronism. The Israelites weren't Israelites until the Exodus. Let me repeat that. Israelites aren't Israelites until after the Exodus. Basically, when the sons of Jacob leave the city of Avaris with a mixed multitude and go wander in the Sinai, they are forged into one people, which we now know as the Israelites. It's the wandering in the Sinai that creates the Israelites. Before then, they are sons of Jacob, they are Amoritic Semites, Asiatics, but they're not, strictly speaking, Israelites. Now, the Hyksos, on the other hand, are Amoritic Semites also, but not the same Amoritic Semites. There's many groups of Amoritic Semites that come and reside at Avaris. The Hyksos are actually not even generally the Amoritic Semites. What they are is the rulers of Avaris. Basically, Dynasty 15. Okay? The Hyksos aren't a people group. They're the leaders. They're the leaders. Hyksos comes from a couple of Egyptian words that essentially means foreign rulers. That's what Hyksos means, is foreign rulers. So it's not actually talking about the people group, it's talking about the leadership. That's very different. When the Hyksos abandon Avaris, they hightail it out before Ahmose I gets there. They leave most of the people behind. You know, they leave most of the Amoritic Semites, the Libyans, the other people who had come and migrated to Avaris. They leave them there. So the Israelites are not directly related to the Hyksos, because the Hyksos take off, they leave, they get out while the getting's good. The sons of Jacob are left behind. They're part of that group of Amoritic Semites that stay at Avaris and then become enslaved. So I would actually join scholars here in basically rejecting the idea that the Hyksos were the ancestors of the early Israelites. They have a cultural affinity to the Hyksos, but they're not the same groups. They're both Amoritic Semites. They're both Asiatics. But they don't come from the same well. In fact, we know that the Hyksos were at Avaris before the arrival of the Israelites. So basically, the Hyksos are there, and then the sons of Jacob migrate to the city of Avaris around the middle 17th century BC. The Hyksos are there long before that point in time. Their roots go all the way back to Dynasty 11. So they're not directly related to each other. So anyway, I hope that clarifies matters. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. And I hope that helps straighten things out. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Gizgo SBOL for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he says, I read an article by Angela Massafra in which she discusses the destruction layer excavated by Yadin Hatzor in Area C, Lower Town, Stratum 16.3, dated to the 16th century BC. Thoughts? I'd have to read that article. I don't think it plays much into this for the most part. If anything, that could be contemporary with, say, Kenyon's City 4 destruction at Jericho. But I don't think that plays any real importance into biblical history. We do know that there is an early bronze destruction layer. This would be more middle bronze. So what we were talking about here for 16th century is definitely middle bronze destruction layer, if that's the case. But I'd have to look at the article. I'd have to really look at the article and see what she's saying exactly. So I haven't read that article. So, but that's way too early for, say, most views of the Exodus. Too early for a late date Exodus. It's too early for a early date Exodus. It's as I say, this is a middle bronze period. So, just my thoughts is possible, but again, I'd have to look at the article in the site report to see exactly what exactly she's saying. So, anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Sinaikas Apologia for $100. Well, thank you very much for that very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. Wow, your generosity to this channel has just been overwhelming, and we so very much appreciate it. Thank you so very much. We couldn't do this channel without your support, and we so deeply appreciate it. That's a very, very generous super chat. Okay, and you ask, which is the best Egyptian god, and why is it Thoth? Well, here I agree with you. Absolutely. Thoth is the best Egyptian god. And here are the reasons why I think he's the best Egyptian god. One, he's the god of scribes. Okay. Yeah, Thea of the Duet says, I mean, Jehudi is awesome. Yes, Jehudi, the Egyptian name for Thoth, is awesome. Yes, he's the god of scribes. Okay, yeah, being a scholar, I dig that. I totally dig that. He is also god of magic. Okay, so if you write magical incantations, Thoth is the guy that helps you out there. He's also god of writing. He was said to have invented writing. And Egyptian writing is really, really cool. I mean, of all the styles of writing you could pick, you look at, say, cuneiform, it looks like someone just spilled a set of golf tees, and you're trying to figure out, well, okay, you got a letter here. Yeah, I don't find, I find it very difficult to read cuneiform. Uh, Egyptian hieroglyphs, I have no problem with them. Like, it has a built-in mnemonic system. Brilliant. So that makes Thoth really cool. Uh, uh, yes. He has some associations with the moon. He's a lunar deity as well, so that's kind of cool. Let's see what else about Thoth. He has a role to play in medicine. So he's got his hands in a lot of cookie jars. He's a wheeler dealer. He's got a diverse portfolio. And plus, he's got a really long beak and can steal your lunch if you're not looking. Ibises are kind of nasty. They'll steal your lunch if given half a chance. They use that beak with a reason. They have that beak for a reason. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, yeah. So definitely, I'll agree here that which is the best Egyptian god and why is Thoth? Yeah, I'll go with this one. I'll definitely go with this one. Um, Seth is a close second, though. I do have to admit I like Seth as well. But Thoth is a super cool deity. And we will probably at some point do a Monday video on Thoth because he does deserve some attention because it's very, very interesting to see some of the things that went into his particular cult and his particular view of religion. Like, for example, he is one of two gods in the Egyptian pantheon whose servants are kings. This is very unusual. Almost all Egyptian gods were served by kings. This is because it was always thought that if it's a god that's worthwhile, only the best humans can serve them. Those are kings, so kings serve gods. Not Thoth. Oh, no, 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 not Thoth. Commoners serve Thoth. Only one of two cults in Egypt to do this. The only other cult of Egypt that had commoners serving its god was Hathor. Very interesting. In many respects, Thoth is sort of a populist deity. He's a deity that was worshipped through by all sectors, all strata of Egyptian culture. He wasn't a royal cult. He wasn't just a commoner cult either, though. So very, very interesting, very fascinating. And he had a major cult center. In the Egyptians, the city is called Khnum. It's also known as Hermopolis Magna. And it was actually right across the river from Amarna. So, interestingly enough, when Amarna finally shut down after the reign of, or during the reign of Tutankhamun, they took a lot of stones and teletot bricks from Amarna and used them in building projects at Hermopolis Magna. So they benefited from pillaging Amarna. So very fascinating cult with a very interesting history. Very, very interesting history. So yeah, this is good. This one I think will be very, very interesting. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Great question. I love how you phrased it too. Thank you very much for this very generous super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and thank you so very much. Okay. Angel VWM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he says, I just finished your book on the Ark of the Covenant. Awesome read. May I ask the ETA of your book about the 10 plagues? Ooh. Long ways off, unfortunately. One of the things I really, really needed to get that book done was a sabbatical. The problem with writing books is it takes time. And unfortunately, that's the one thing I don't have, is a lot of time. As many of my subscribers already know, I do YouTube part-time. I have a full-time job, and YouTube is also a full-time job in its own right. I mean, it takes a long time to produce these videos. Anytime you devote a lot of time to making content, you have to take it from somewhere else. You know, you only have a limited crop of time. So that unfortunately has limited how much writing I've been able to do. I'm still doing some writing, but I'm finding my time is just really, really restricted. Plus, the current job I'm at is very hard on me physically and mentally. So, when I get home from work, I'm usually not in a good frame of mind to write, should I ever want to write. So, we didn't earn enough to make much of a dent I think we earned something like about 2 weeks worth of a sabbatical. That's not enough time to write a book. So unfortunately, we don't have the resources yet to complete that book on the 10 plagues. But I'd love to do it. I want to do it. This is something I really believe in, and I think would be of great benefit for the community at large. It'd be written very similar in style to the Ark of the Covenant book, so it'd be, again, in that sort of bridge style between, say, a lay work and an academic work. Again, I'd love to richly illustrate it, because I love picture books. I love books that have beautiful pictures. And it's just something I really want, I believe passionately in. But I also think that this is something that could be an incredibly good resource as well. So, again, if people fund it, it'll happen. If it doesn't, well, that's okay too. Whether it happens or whether it doesn't, God gets the glory. Either way. So I'm perfectly okay with God saying yes. I'm perfectly okay with him saying no. So we put it out there and we see what happens. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you for buying my book too. I very much appreciate that. Believe it or not, that actually helps also. When you buy my book, it basically tells the publisher that I'm worth taking another chance on. This is something that's very, very important, because most authors don't. When you write a book, you get a small advance if you're lucky. A lot of academic books don't. I got a small advance on this book, but if your book doesn't earn enough to what's called earn out, basically they start making extra money after your advance. If they cover all the expenses covered by your advance, at that point the publisher has earned enough to say, okay, this was worthwhile. So when you buy my book, you basically, even though I don't get any money directly from that, it helps the book earn out, and that gives the publisher confidence that they didn't invest in a pig in a poke. So I really appreciate you buying the book, because it's adding to that confidence for adding to the publisher's confidence in me as a writer, and I really appreciate that. And I'm glad you liked it too. I mean, I have to admit, I always am thrilled to hear people say that they love the book. It's just, I know when I see the occasional review, and it hasn't gotten a lot of reviews on Amazon, but when I see those reviews on Amazon, I just go, ooh, I love seeing the reviews of my book. And unfortunately, there hasn't been that many reviews, but the few that have been out there have been usually very, very positive. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, and that's the status of things. Okay. Gizmo SBOL for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think Shishonk was being a political opportunist and exploiting the division in the Israelite kingdom by attacking the lands of his ally Jeroboam? Yes, definitely. Shishonk the First was very much an opportunist. He liked sowing division. He liked, yeah, absolutely. I mean, frankly, once Jeroboam returned to lead the 10 tribes of Israel, he didn't really need the support of Pharaoh anymore. He didn't need the support of Shishonk. So, who knows how long that lasted. So, with that said, Shishonk also was not the most trustworthy guy. He loved sowing divisions and intrigue. I mean, he was basically kind of like a spider in a web, where he would sow division wherever he could. And that's one of the reasons why he sheltered Jeroboam to begin with, was to poke a thumb in the eye of Solomon. So definitely he exploited that division. There's no doubt about it. And he did it by attacking both kingdoms, when they were basically most divided. So absolutely, I think you have it dead on here that he was an opportunist. He was exploiting it for political purposes. He was weakening the Levant. And really, he was weakening it so he could pillage it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, let's see what's next here. Okay, I see something right there. Richard, House Plantagenet, for $5. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Pre-Uruk Mesopotamian was peopled by Ubayyids, then Sumerians came, later some Akkadians, briefly Gutians, Elamites, and Amorites. Which population was Abraham from? Okay. He is actually from the Amorites. His region of origin is in actually northern Mesopotamia, around the city of Urkesh. And Urkesh is, as I said, in the northern portion of Mesopotamia. So that's his origin. Now, the region that he lived in, Urkesh, kind of switched hands frequently as far as its hegemony goes. It was often in the hands of the king of Mari, but also sometimes fell into the hands of the Elamites also. So the particular hegemony that he was probably most associated with was the king of Mari. And that because Terra was an ally of the king of Mari. So that's basically where I think Abraham's sort of descendancy comes from is the Amorites, and the Amorites of northern Mesopotamia. So, and again, once the people of Urkesh throw out Terra, then they have to start moving to Syria and then down into the Levant. So anyway, that I hope explains it. I don't think he originated from of Leonard Woolley's I do take the view that it's from, say, Urkesh instead of down in Sumeria, in Sumer. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, and I hope that answers your question. Okay. Cooley27 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Legend of the Falk. I think I'm only a legend in my own mind. Wouldn't go quite so far as saying I'm a legend. Monster of Myth, maybe. But I think I've earned the Monster of Myth title, but I don't know about legend. Okay. The Merneptah Stela. Given that Jezreel means God will sow, I say the follow-up, its seeds is not one of the all-time great puns. Jezreel is the actual reference. What do you say? Possible. You know, that. I mean, that wouldn't be that would not be beyond the Egyptian poets. Really, it would not be beyond Egyptian poets to use that sort of, double meaning. Amphibole, when we've talked about amphibole a lot on this channel. Having two meanings for something. The Egyptians were masters at amphibole. And that's because a lot of Egyptian language had a lot of homonyms, double entendres. These sorts of literary devices were just rife in Egyptian literature. Absolutely rife in Egyptian literature. So, yeah, it's possible. I'll say this: it's definitely possible. And as I said, they had that literary acumen that they could do this. So, they weren't these. We have to understand that ancient writers, whether Egyptian, early Israelite, Mesopotamian, they were highly literate people. They read widely. They encountered other literature. They were good at what they did. Very, very good at what they did. And this is one of the things I sort of bemoan about modern scholarship. Is a lot of modern scholars seem to treat ancient writers as uncultured savages. And I think that's really regrettable. Really, really regrettable. I think these people were highly educated for their time. I think they were very savvy. I think they were very literate. I think they understood poetry, poetic devices, in ways that oftentimes that we don't obviously see because it doesn't fit into our frame of literature. We're the ones who are not being widely read here, not them. So, and as I said, I really bemoan this about modern scholarship because we think because it doesn't fit into our concept, it can't be literate. No, it's the other way around. We're not widely read. so we can't understand that it fits into their concept of literature. So I agree. This is absolutely possible. I'll have to look into it some more. I didn't realize that was the meaning of Jezreel. So I'll basically look into this some more. It sounds very, very interesting and definitely possible. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. We are getting close to 3 hours here. And my voice is already going out. Okay, we got a few more super chats, it looks like. Steven Koskowitz for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. I have trouble understanding something about the ascension of Jesus. How could his physical body enter into heaven if it's a spiritual realm there? Well, it's not the first time a physical body ascended into heaven. You know, we have to understand that this is not the first time the biblical narrative mentions something like this. It happens twice before. It happens first to Enoch. In Genesis, it says that Enoch, was taken up. And it's generally assumed he was taken up bodily. It also happens to the prophet Elijah, where he's taken up into heaven, in a chariot of fire without dying. Okay? We don't know exactly how the mechanics of this work. Okay? Part of it is because, to be honest, we have a problem not just understanding the heavenly realm, but the physical realm too. We don't understand what exactly is this weird stuff called matter. Yeah, we can break it down into parts, protons, neutrons, electrons. We know it's mostly empty space. We know the physical universe is mostly empty space. And electrical fields. We know there's a lot of particle fields out there. Waves, we're basked by just so many waves it isn't even funny. Understanding even all of that, that we're nothing but clouds of electrons, neutrons, and protons being hammered back and forth by particles of radiation and waves, and that you see my image on the screen and it's really just a reflection of our own mental images. That color is in many sense an interpretation of light waves. We have such a poor understanding of the physical universe that it would be even hard to start to even comprehend how that could even say transition a physical body could transition into a spiritual realm. But again, too, as discussed in an earlier super chat, there does seem to be some relationship of causation, space, time in a spiritual realm. Well, if you have some concept of space and you have some concept of time, you have actually a metaphysical foundation that a physical body could be brought into and survive, essentially. So it's a spiritual realm, but it isn't exactly without parameters. And I've said that before. The third heaven has rules. It has rules. It has laws as such, maybe not physical per se, but it has some physicality to it. So, wait, did I mute the mic? Is everyone hearing me okay? Put that on there. Send a message. I don't think I muted the mic. Okay. So it's just, sorry, Andrew, it's just you. Okay. Wow, had me worried again. Okay. Woo. Yeah, so essentially there is causality, there is some notion of space, and some notion of, say, time in heaven. So yeah, Andrew Graham here causes a panic on a live stream. We had some technical difficulties with our mic like last week, so okay. So yeah, anyway, so Stephen, I hope that answers your super chat. Thank you very much for the question. It is an interesting question. We don't know exactly, again, how that translation from physical to spiritual works, but it also doesn't seem to be completely incompatible either. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Jonathan Snyman for 70. I don't know what that currency is. I don't think I've seen that before. South African Czar. Okay. Well, you're the first person from South Africa that's given us a super chat. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. And welcome to the channel. You might be new, you might not be, but it's the first time I've seen somebody use that currency on this channel. So thank you very much. Hi, Dr. Falk. Big fan of your work. Well, thank you very much. Very much appreciate the compliment. I'm studying nature conservation and I'm doing an assignment about human-wildlife conflict. I wanted to ask if the Egyptians really used cheetahs as hunting animals. No, they didn't so much use cheetahs for hunting animals. They did keep them as pets. The Egyptians had zoos. Okay, we actually have the earliest zoo in Egypt. I think it goes back to Dynasty. I want to say Dynasty 2. No, it's very old. But the Egyptians had zoos. They imported exotic animals like cheetahs, leopards, baboons. They imported elephants. Giraffes would be imported sometimes. They'd import rhinos. So, yes, absolutely. The Egyptians, would bring in animals for their entertainment, like as I said, for zoos. As hunting animals, less so. They might have trained them for hunting animals, perhaps for, say, lion hunts. But I'd have to look into that more. Typically, when they went hunting, if that's the only place I can see them using cheetahs, but I don't think it would be very effective as a hunting animal. Egyptians had various kinds of hunting. They would hunt lions. As kings hunt lions. I mean, that was the sport of kings, was to hunt lions. They would also hunt like ducks. And duck hunting was very, very popular. And they trained actually domestic cats for that. Not cheetahs. Cheetahs were too big. But they would train, like, say, domesticated cats to hunt. So they would do that. I'm not sure what else would they have hunted that would have required the use of cheetahs, but the only thing I could think that they might have used cheetahs for is hunting lions, and I don't know how effective that would be. I know they often did this on chariot, so cheetah can easily outrun a chariot. So I don't know how well they would be trained, how easy they'd be trained for this, but or whether they used them as say a way of baiting a lion or something. But I'd have to look more into say the reliefs and see if there's evidence of this. I don't know off the top of my head if the Egyptians, in what context, the Egyptians would have used cheetahs as hunting animals. Now, they also had dogs. We have to remember this too, that they had basically an early kind of greyhound that they also used as hunting animals. So I would imagine that the dogs would be much easier to train for this than cheetahs. So we have to keep that in mind too. But we do know that they use dogs for hunting animals, and we do know they definitely used cats, at least say domesticated cats, for duck hunting, which is very interesting, very very interesting, because there's some very very cute reliefs of this, where the cat is basically going after mice, flushing out the ducks, while the human hunts the ducks. Um, yeah, it's a but they were trained. They did train animals. They knew how the Egyptians knew how to train animals. And they definitely trained, as I said, dogs, cats, and possibly cheetahs. If cheetahs are trainable, they might have. I don't know how trainable a cheetah actually is. Well, we
Trainable.
yeah yeah trainable, but it'll gnaw your arm off at the earliest opportunity. Um, yeah. So even if they did train them to hunt, they might not be very good at it as far as responding to human commands. And that's a huge part of training an animal to hunt, is that it knows when to respond to its human. Yeah. Oh yes, they do. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'd have to look more into the research on this to give you more information. It's been a long time since I've looked at say cheetahs. I looked at it cheetahs briefly when I did my article on the Punt reliefs, but it's been really a long time since I've looked at the use of the cheetah in, say, Egyptian society. So, anyway, that's the best answer I can give you here. Thank you very much for the super chat. I'm glad you're enjoying the channel, and I'm glad you're enjoying the content. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, I think that is our last super chat. Okay. So I'm going to take two non-super chats, and I'm going to call it a night because my voice is giving out on me. So, and it's all we've already been going for 3 hours. So I'm going to take two non-super chats, and then we're going to call it a night. So I'm going to scan for one here. And yes, again, I do look for that Q and colon here. Ah, that is actually a really good question. So I am actually going to take this one from Richard of Plantagenet. Why are there no hieratic or demotic Unicode fonts anywhere? Does no one love the sexy stepchildren of Egyptian orthography? Okay. I can tell you why there's no Demotic Unicode fonts. Because Demotic is not written in letters. It's written in ligatures. Okay? Now, what is a ligature? Let's say you have, you might have seen this, where you have in like older publications, where you have an A and an E, and they basically are side by side, and they print the A and E like one letter. Okay, it's two letters to form one letter. Like, for example, they might slant the like a capital A so that one side of the A is really the backbone of the E. Okay, so that's a ligature. You got two characters written as one. Well, in the case of demotic writing, it's all ligatures. Okay, the whole word is written as a ligature. Because of that, it can be very, very difficult to construct a font to do that sort of. You would need so many variations of this to account for every ligature. You're just not going to be able to create a proper font using demotic. Now, hieratic. That's a different problem. In the case of hieratic, it's going to come down to the decision of which hieratic, because there's more than one. A hieratic was used throughout the entire history of ancient Egypt. We find hieratic in the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, late period, all the way into the Ptolemaic period. The problem with hieratic is it's different for every historical period in Egypt. One of the things I actually sat in one of the Unicode meetings that was held at an RC one year, an American Research Center in Egypt conference, which is the sort of the big Egyptology conference. And members of the Unicode committee came to RC and held this like big meeting with all the Egyptologists to talk about, how Unicode will affect, hieroglyphic. Okay. Well, almost everyone in that audience did not understand the conversation. Just plain old didn't understand it. Okay. The Unicode committee was talking about encoding, character encoding. And everyone in there sat in their thought thinking, oh, are they talking about fonts? Yeah, great idea. We'd love a new font. No, it's not talking about fonts. It's talking about how you encode fonts. Yeah, so almost everyone in that audience didn't understand what was going on in there. I was probably the only person in that audience who understood what the committee was talking about, because I have a very, very sizable technology background. I mean, I worked in IT for 25 years. So you learn a little bit about Unicode in that time. So, most of the people in that audience did not understand this, did not understand what they were talking about. And those in that committee walked away going, we don't know what to do next here, because we want to continue this initiative, but there's no consensus here to drive it. So if they're having that problem just trying to, create Unicode for hieroglyphic, and there is a higher, at least for the basic symbols, there's at least sufficient Unicode support for hieroglyphic, but not for the extended symbols. The current Unicode standard does not include the extended symbols. Unfortunate, but there it is. where you get, say, for example, now with hieratic, where you have many expressions of different standards of hieratic, you now getting that consensus is going to be next to impossible. It's going to be really next to impossible. Yeah. Well, it's even worse. He adds to his question here. So you're saying we need a whole family of hieratic fonts? Yeah, you're going to need a whole family of hieratic fonts, but you're also going to need a whole sort of alternate encodings too, because there's also the fact that some symbols in hieratic only appear in certain periods of time. Like, for example, the beating with a stick. You know, that glyph, that orthography, only appears in the New Kingdom and onward. So, you know, you get certain things about hieratic that, and it changes radically. You know, the symbols do change radically. You get variations. You know, it's not just one symbol. It can be many variations of the same symbol within the same, say, stretch of time. It's a whole a new level of complexity. Okay, there's a whole another level of complexity for hieratic on top of hieroglyphic. and then you're going to get the problem of ligatures when you add demotic on top of that. You know, Richard Jasnow once said to me, you know, somebody told him once, you know, well, how can you read this chicken scratch demotic? And he just said, you just learn to read it. You know what the ligature says. That's how demotic is taught. It's not taught by reading the characters. It's taught by reading the ligatures. So this is going to be a very, very difficult problem to solve, especially when we start talking about fonts and Unicode, font encoding and that sort of thing. So character encoding, yeah. So this is a very difficult problem. We're just lucky to have hieroglyphic, at least basic hieroglyphic. So anyway, I want to thank you for that question. It's an interesting question, and I thought that was a worthwhile question to answer. Okay. And I'll take one more non-super chat. And then I'm going to call it a night. Let's see here, because I'm going to take this one from Brick Creation. Yes, Brick Creation gives a lot of super chats and gets a lot of his questions answered, but I like this question. I like this question a lot. So this will be our last non-super chat for the night, and possibly the last question for the night. So he asks, is it worth studying Paleo-Hebrew? Okay. Probably a better way to say it is not Paleo-Hebrew, but Paleo-Canaanite or early alphabetic inscriptions. And I'd say yes, absolutely. You know, studying West Semitic inscriptions is worth it. It's part of the backgrounds of, say, the biblical texts. So absolutely, this is totally worth it. Now, it's a hard study. It's complicated. It takes a lot of work. A lot of work. You have to be very, very good with your Semitic languages. You have to also be very good with your epigraphy, but it is definitely worth it. And I don't think enough people get into this, honestly. Some of the reason why we have so many charlatans, basically commenting on Paleo Hebrew is because there's a vacuum here. We don't have enough scholars in this field who are knowledgeable. Christopher Rolston, great example of a scholar that's really, really knowledgeable in this field. Really, really knowledgeable. He's also a friend too, so that helps. But yeah, it's worth it. I'll say this one. Anytime you can get more languages under your belt, it's worth doing. I think it was explained to me once that scholarship, ancient Near Eastern scholarship, is a language game. It's a language game. The more languages you get under your belt, the more tools you have to do your scholarship. This is why, as a grad student, I took as many languages as I could. I did everything I could to get as much language foundation as I could. This is why I took Akkadian. This is why I took Hebrew. This is why I took Greek. This is why I took Egyptian. This is why I self-study Ugaritic and Hittite. I just getting all that languages under your belt just expands your toolkit. And this allows you to do better scholarship. So, absolutely, this is worth doing. Completely. And I can't say it more than that. Because more languages means more tools, which means better scholarship. And it's as simple as that. And I'll say this too. Languages did not come easy to me. Still don't come easy to me. Languages are hard work for me. Really, really hard work. I have to blood, sweat, and tear to learn a language. People think after you learn 13 languages that, the 14th comes easy. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Yeah, and as my producer says, this is why there's so many shortcuts or so many charlatans, is because they take shortcuts. They don't do the languages and they don't do the work. And thus, their scholarship isn't very good. Okay? So, definitely worth it. Definitely do it if you've got the opportunity. So anyway, and that's going to be our last question for the night. Okay. Yeah, we're going to call it a night at this point. It's, it's 10 to midnight here. We've gone 3 hours and almost 20 minutes. So that's long enough. So anyway, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Lots of great super chats. I'm overwhelmed at how many super chats there were tonight. Yeah, I know there's some people here who are pushing me towards the 6-hour marathon session. That's still not going to happen. But anyway, I want to thank all of you who joined us tonight in the live stream and in the live chat. I want to thank everyone who donated a super chat. Thank you again. You guys help keep us going. I want to thank our Patreon supporters who give sacrificially, who don't get nearly as enough thanks as they deserve, but we do very, very much appreciate their support. And I also want to thank our regular subscribers and the people who comment on our channel, because that feeds the algorithm. And the more the algorithm gets fed, the more YouTube promotes the videos. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm glad you joined us tonight, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.